Dames en heren, goedemiddag.
Hoi hoi, hello and welcome to the Meet Maastricht podcast. I'm Katrina and together with our resident local Lucy, we will be exploring some of the amazing stories that make Maastricht so special. So sit back, relax and join us as we learn about our favourite Dutch city. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 30 of the Meet Maastricht podcast. We're into our 30s now. What are we talking about today, Lucy?
Well, one of the main buildings in the city and one of the places that the city probably owes its existence to some extent. And we've been skirting around it long enough now, I think, even though it has come up in many other podcasts as well, in references and illustrations and whatnot. The Sint Servaas. Yeah.
And if there's anyone who doesn't know where that is, where is the Sint Servaas church?
Well, I do suppose that most of you who live here, even if you have not been here for a very long time, have come across the large square in the middle of the city, and which has two big churches there side by side, and the biggest one with the two sets of identical towers, that is the Servaas.
Not the one with the red tower, the one next to it.
No. Yes, but it feels a bit weird to identify Servaas by the St. John's, which is much younger, and to medieval Maastricht that would have been a secondary church, not the main one.
So I know we are doing 2 episodes on Sint Servaas.
Yeah.
What is this one going to be about?
Yeah, we thought that if you were going to discuss a building that goes back 1700 years, it is a bit presumptuous to think you can deal with that in half an hour to 45 minutes, which is generally the duration of our pods. So we decided to split it up. And this first one will be centering on the people, and the second one will center on the stones. So today we will be talking mainly about the uses of the church by the people, the way it was administered, the way it was looked at, the way it functioned in the life of the city. And then in the second one, we will look at the building history, which is a fascinating saga all by itself. Yeah.
Okay. So for our first one, I guess where do we start? Because the building has to be built.
Yeah, I would suggest with Saint Servatius himself.
Ah, okay.
That
makes sense.
That seems. Yeah, that exactly. That seems the most obvious place to start, really. He was, of course, not a saint right from the beginning. He came from a region in the then still Roman Empire we know today as Armenia.
Okay.
So one of the countries bordering Turkey, far away. But then again, the Roman Empire, of course, was a far-flung, large entity, and for quite a long time, a relatively safe space, where people and goods and ideas could freely circulate. So in that sense, it is not really out of the ordinary to find an Armenian in the Maas Valley. And this, of course, combined with early Christianity's missionary zeal. Of course, Jesus had sent his apostles out to bring the gospel to the world. Or maybe that was more St. Paul's doing. But anyway, there were, in the first centuries of... you have a name for that in English that I keep forgetting. The Common Era, is it?
Yeah, so in this instance, we are talking about pretty much the relationship, I guess, to Christ. It was BC for before Christ and AD for Anno Domini, which is
After Christ.
Yeah. But now it is because that was a little bit focused on Christianity, and not every culture is Christian.
Yeah.
It is Common Era and before Common Era. So BCE and CE.
Okay. All right. I'll try and get used to that. So anyway, the Common Era, the first few centuries of the first millennium.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm still inclined to say after Christ, but yeah, here you go. The point is, scientifically speaking, that we are not exactly sure about some of these facts. It is a tradition told from generation to generation that he came here as a missionary, but there are traces of a Servaas, an important teacher, missionary, bishop in the very early church, because he appears in reports of large church gatherings in the 4th century.
Okay.
And these church gatherings were called by the Pope to decide on matters of doctrine. And a Servaas became famous because he defended the doctrine of Jesus not being only man but also God. Oh, anyway, we will not get into all that, but this is where we actually do find him, and he has also been part of papal diplomatic missions to mediate conflicts between lay rulers. So it was not a village priest.
No.
It was a man of learning and standing who traveled the Roman Empire. And, well, supposedly he eventually was appointed to be the bishop of Tongeren, which was an open, comfortable, important Roman city at the time. Important in the sense that everything related to administration and military command and stuff like that was concentrated there. So it was a real city, which Maastricht was not at the time, mind you. Maastricht was basically a military camp guarding the bridge on the river. So that is far less important. So anyway, Servaas was a bishop in Tongeren. And during these times already, the pressure on the borders of the Roman Empire was increasing. Internal unrest was rising. The empire was creaking in all its seams. There were raids and invasions and unrest and uprisings and all sorts of stuff. And Servaas decided he would be safer in Maastricht. We are not clear he fled there for just a little while, or he actually transferred the bishop's seat from Tongeren to Maastricht, but we are sure that his successors were bishops of Maastricht. Anyway, while here in Maastricht, he died, and he was buried, as was the custom at the time, on the side of the Roman road. So outside the castellum, outside the Roman camp. Which, of course, for sanitary reasons, is the sensible thing to do. So, the Romans had many very sensible habits, and this was just one of them. So his gravesite was outside the then castellum. And if you are standing on the Vrijthof now with your back to the church, and you face the river, there is still quite a bit to go before you would have reached the walls and the moat of the castellum. Because the church that you see today stands on the site of the grave of Servaas. Okay, and we are starting to build, so to speak, in the 4th century, maybe just a wooden construction or something like that, replaced by a stone one pretty soon after that, replaced by a bigger stone one after that, and so on and so forth. And we'll talk about that when we discuss the building. But anyway, this is how it started, and why did it become so big? Because right from the beginning, Servaas was considered a saint that you could visit and plead to for, the requests that people would have of saints and still have. Devout Catholics who have a habit of praying to the saints will still have specific requests for specific saints.
And so how did he become a saint?
Well, yeah, especially in those early years of the church, that is always very, very intricately knitted together layers of fact and fiction and wishful thinking. The believers will look up to people who have led exemplary lives and try to emulate their example. And of course, rulers will think that it is advantageous to have a place where people will throng to visit and worship, and over the years and centuries, all sorts of benefits and stories and rites and things will pile up. So apart from the stone witnesses of all these visitors and all these pleas, there is this entire construction in custom and belief and law that does the same thing. So rulers will confer rights, and the church will confer advantages, as in, if you have visited the grave of Servaas, the time you have to spend in purgatory after your death will be shortened by this much.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So there were definite gains to be had from making these pilgrimages, and the more important the saint was, the bigger the benefits.
Yeah. And was he a saint of something specific? How you have like a patron saint of things.
I don't think he would be a patron saint of something specific, but he is seen as one of the prime mediators between the faithful and heaven. And that is why he carries the key. That one of the ways you recognize him is a person in the garb of a bishop, with the mantle and the mitre and the staff. But he also carries a key, and that is particular to Saint Servaas. The key was given to him by Saint Peter, and it is the key to heaven. So Saint Servaas has Saint Peter's ear. So if you pray to Servaas to help you get into heaven, he will plead your case with Peter.
So it's a good one to have on your side.
Exactly. And also, he is generally depicted with some sort of monster at his feet, and him using his staff as a spear to kill the monster, and that symbolizes this heresy that he fought so hard in these church gatherings.
Would people come to Maastricht to specifically pray to speak to Saint Servaas then?
Yeah, and they've been doing that almost from the beginning, because we have early medieval sources in which this is quite obvious, and also medieval writers like Gregorius van Tours and Henrik van Veldeke, who has his statue on the little square next to the church where he sits with his lyre gazing at the church. They have done their very best to take the very sparse historical facts that we have and compose, in the case of Gregorius, a beautiful history, and in the case of Henrik van Veldeke, a beautiful sung poem on the life and deeds and miracles performed by Saint Servaas. And of course, that's a sort of advertising. I don't mean this disrespectfully, but this is also a way by which the name and the fame of Servaas would have been spread over most of Europe.
Okay, so sort of traditional storytelling and singing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or all the forms of the news, It's just, and then, of course, what is also necessary in this type of publicity, also not intended to sound disrespectfully, is that in a recognition by by the government. And of course, for centuries, government in Europe would also have been very tightly wrapped up with religion as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Christianity could use the rulers and later on the state to spread and to reinforce its grasp on the people, but it worked the same way the other way around. I mean, in the messy, dangerous centuries after the breakup of the Roman Empire, of course, both the rulers and the priests have needed each other.
Yeah.
So you can see them developing in conjunction for a long time.
Mm.
And that and of course the local regional rulers supporting the church, accepting the church, helping to spread the teachings of the church, that has been very important for the Servaas, because it owes its very independent position to that. One of the originally regional rulers was Charlemagne in the 8th century, and he came to rule most of then Europe.
Mm.
And to be a church directly, so not the church as an entity, but the church as a building and a community, being connected to the emperor meant that the local rulers had precious little to say about what you were doing. And until the French Revolution, when of course all of these things were stopped and demolished and broken off and abolished, Servaas has been in this very privileged, very free, independent position. You know, only owing allegiance to the Pope, of course, far, far away, and allegiance to the Emperor, also far, far away.
Yeah. Do we know how Tongara felt about their bishop becoming the pilgrimage in Maastricht and becoming such a huge, important and long-lasting? I mean, people still, if you look up, you know, top 10 things to see in Maastricht, it's probably going to be number one up till today. So do we know, has there been any conflict around that?
But not that I know of. Okay. But
maybe some murmurings early on that weren't
once
recorded.
We can move around again, I'll go exploring over there. And no, I don't. Well, you know, like I said, it was the 4th, 5th, 6th century where anarchy and upheaval and Roman Tongeren was pretty much razed to the ground.
Yeah.
So and Maastricht survived those very unruly decades and centuries, not exactly unscathed, but it remained in existence.
Yeah.
Because it was a fort, basically. And then because there was a bishop, there was some sort of administration at all times. You know, even when the state was falling apart, and the tribes or the peoples who were indigenous and the invading peoples were still smashing each other's heads in. At least the church could maintain some sort of order for a while.
Yeah.
And it's been very, very dangerous for quite some time.
And as well as that sort of political role, I know we've spoken about different orders and churches and convents and monasteries having a very sort of social and community role in community services, basically. Did Sint Servaas and the people who sort of congregated around that church and that place serve that kind of function as well?
Well, we know precious little about any of it for quite some time.
Yeah.
So there was this originally Roman settlement that remained inhabited during these darker years, and what is now, and on the site of what is now Our Sweet Lady Church, that is within the original Roman camp. That is where the bishop's church stood.
Okay.
There must have been some sort of administration by whoever was in charge at the time. And there must have been some habitation for the people, as in wooden and thatched structures. mostly. And of course there would still have been agriculture and production and trading going on, but on a very, very, very small scale. So because the pretty much worldwide empire had dissolved.
Yeah.
So people would be very pleased if they could be self-sufficient, and that was basically it for quite some time. And it is only when you get to about the 10th, 11th, 12th century that you can see, authorities becoming more settled, and cities starting to develop, production also being exported, so trade being slowly revived and all that.
Yeah.
But it's we have very few sources, and we don't have a lot of knowledge about the centuries in between. Although the archaeological finds in Maastricht are slowly filling up the gaps. The Vrijthof has been dug out to make that horrible parking thing. And the archaeologists didn't get a lot of time, but they did get enough time to do some research there, and they have found graves from the 5th and the 6th and the 7th century. So the period of the Merovingian kings, that's the dynasty preceding the Carolingian of the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries, the descendants of Charlemagne. So there is early medieval stuff. Once in a while, the river yields something to the archaeologically inclined divers. And during the big restoration campaign of Servaaskerk's basilica in the 1980s, they dug out the entire floor. And all of that was of course meticulously researched and documented, and is still now there are publications coming out about that now. So that is also a factor in all of this, that there is probably loads of knowledge in notes and drawings and pictures and measurements, but it is still in archives or libraries because it needs to be put into publications.
Okay. Well, that just makes it exciting, isn't it? It's an ongoing. Yeah. We're learning more about it all the time.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. It just goes on and on and on. Anyway, if you go into just this last thing on the early history, if you go into Servaas's church, you'll have to pay admittance, but it is very much worth it, because in the treasure room you can go down the stairs into part of the archaeological excavations. So there you can see wall fragments of these earlier structures.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there has been something in that same spot for a long time. Yeah. There
has been a long series of buildings in that same spot, but we'll talk about that in the other podcast.
Yeah. And there's also is it the remains of Sint Servaas, or supposedly the remains of Sint Servaas?
Yes, of course. When pilgrims' church has to offer to the pilgrims the main attraction, so to speak, and that is the remains of the saint you are making the pilgrimage to.
Yeah.
And after that, things always get fuzzy and confusing, and Servaas is no exception to that. The supposed spot of his burial is in the oldest crypt. So if you go into the church itself, the altar has been erected above the spot where Servaas was buried. So you can go down the stairs into the crypt, and you can look through a small set of bars, a barred door and window, and there's a second room that you can look into, and that's where Servaas was supposedly buried. What usually would happen with the remains of saints is that they would be taken out of their graves and then rehoused in, the most beautiful shrines that people could think of and make.
Yeah.
And these shrines would be put on display within the church for all to see, high up on the altar or some very conspicuous place. So that is where the supposed remains of supposedly Servaas are. Of course, contemporary science has something to say about all this, as you can imagine. But the shrine is a wonder, an absolutely blindingly beautiful piece of medieval craftsmanship.
Mm.
And for decades, it has been housed in the treasure room of the church. But now, because of the pandemic, it has been taken out of there and put in the middle of the church again, which is this medieval tradition of supplication to the saints to please help us. And this particular beautiful, beautiful house in gold and gemstones has been called in the history of Maastricht always the emergency house, or the noodkist. Emergency as in crisis.
Yes.
And so it would, it being the most important relic that the city has, it would be the first thing, the most important thing that people would turn to ask for help.
Mm.
So in earlier centuries, when there was an enemy army approaching, or there was an epidemic raging in the city, or there was any kind of an emergency, any kind of this is how the supplications and the prayers of the people would be concentrated. The noodkist would be carried in procession around the city, and of course we can't do that now because of COVID. So the church administration has decided they will put it in the middle of the church. So of course this type of object with this type of significance was prevalent in all of Christianity at the time. So if you go to Aken, you find from practically the same period, you find a comparable shrine, and it's so that is something to keep in mind. I mean, all these large pilgrims places were, of course, in competition with each other too for the pilgrims. And of course, people had a spiritual goal in leaving their house and their village and going on journeys that were extremely dangerous compared to what our type of travel is nowadays. But of course, the reverse side of that coin is, of course, the economic significance of these smelly hordes roaming the roads. And all the pilgrimage destinations were eager to receive them. So in this area, the Maas Valley, more or less, they had to decide on a roster to not steal each other's pilgrims all the time. And
so practical for something that's so sort of meant to be almost so spiritual and very, I don't know why I don't associate that with like a schedule.
Yeah, no, you don't. But it's, I am saying these things also to make clear that before the Enlightenment and before this in many ways very advantageous and in many ways also very bad, I think, split between the material and the spiritual. Before that, of course, the mentality of the people was much more of a unitary kind. So they would have thought that this was perfectly okay.
Yeah.
Everything being mixed up into one way of looking at the world without these exclusionary oppositions of emotion and ratio and science and religion. No, those partitions simply were not there. And for us, that is almost impossible to sense what that is like, but we can see glimpses of it in this sort of thing. Tongeren was an important place of pilgrimage. Maastricht was an important place of pilgrimage. So was Aken, so were several others. And so they were all sort of attracting pilgrims with, bigger and bigger gains to be had from going on pilgrimage there. So at some point, they looked at each other and said, yeah, come on, this is stupid. Let's just... So what they agreed on doing was to have a roster of 7 years.
Oh, okay. Not months, it was years.
Yes, yeah. So there would be the pilgrimage to the shrine of Servaas in year X, and then the next year you would go to Tongeren, and the next year you would go to Aken and to the other, until 7 years later it was again time to make the pilgrimage to Servaas.
So I would have thought you would sort of do a little round trip in just one go. It'd be because they're quite close together. Just see them sort of on the way, like to come back every year.
Yeah, no, but people were doing this constantly. Yeah, people were doing this constantly, and I suppose this shrine hopping would have been. Oh God, yeah. This shrine hopping would have gone on for people who were in it for the long haul. We have reports of pilgrims who were on their way to Jerusalem, which of course is the main place to go.
Yes.
You know, that is the absolute summit.
That's a bit further away if you're in,
very,
depending where you are.
Yeah, they'd be gone for years, you know. So and it would always be doubtful if they'd come back. Yeah, Jerusalem, of course, was the penultimate in pilgrimages. But yeah, and those people would go from shrine to shrine, basically. So because they were traveling anyway, so you know, wouldn't matter. Let's go visit Servaas.
Well, see that seems practical.
For us, we can still see this in a huge celebration we call the Heiligdomsvaart. Heiligdom is a sanctuary, and vaart is a way you could describe a pilgrimage. So a pilgrimage to the sanctuaries that is still celebrated once every 7 years.
Okay.
We did that again, I think, 2 years ago. So in 5 years there'll be another Heiligdomsvaart.
Wow.
And in the intervening years, you can go to the neighboring cities and see what they make of it there, because of course they are fantastic festivals of faith and of community and of centering the spiritual, and it's impressive. It really is. And of course, the contemporary organization, quite wisely, of course, does not necessarily center on faith. They make sure that these are pageants and celebrations and concerts and expositions and, you know, a very wide-ranging cultural program that will appeal to a wide range of people too.
How did the French Revolution affect Saint Servatius?
Oh, terribly, of course. This is a big jump, Katrina, from the from the early Middle Ages to the French Revolution. I'd like to say a few things about the intervening 500 years, if you don't mind.
500 years is nothing, Lucy.
Just shrug that off. No, because I'd like to say a few words about the lords of the church. Because I said before that Servaas has been, the Church of Saint Servaas has been in this very advantageous position in the hierarchy of administrations, as being belonging really only to the emperor, who was far, far away, but who would also, you know, bestow rights and privileges and possessions on the church. Because of course this is something to realize as well, that until the French Revolution, the church was also a temporal power. You know, as I said before, it was only after the Enlightenment that we started to split everything up. So before then, the church would have possessions and lands and armies, and the church would be a ruler.
Yes.
When you see that very clearly, for instance, in the prince bishops, you know, see the double title, the prince bishops of Liège, look, just to the south of us, and one of the lords of Maastricht. Except not over the Sint Servaas Church and its possessions. You know, the Servaas Church could go its own sweet way and not really mind both lords of the city, neither the Prince Bishop or the Dukes of Brabant and their successors, until, of course, the French Revolution, when all of that was abolished. And if you have temporal power, if you have a state, well, even if you don't look at the church, you need an administration, you need a hierarchy. You need people to do the jobs that need to be done when it comes to administering the land and collecting the taxes and taking care of the people to some extent. And this was an important function of the lords of this particular church. It had a college of canons. And they were when gathered together, that is a chapter. So the Servaas was a chapter church. And this is important to realize as well. It was not a parish church. The parish did exist and for a while was tolerated in the building of the Servaas, but already in the Middle Ages, St. John's was built to provide for the people. The Servaas, as a building, was really only designed for and used by the pilgrims.
Okay.
And that was not always very pleasant for the canons. They would be up high on the altar, participating in the services they were required to do, the chanting and the praying. And there are stories of the canons fainting because of the stench coming from the pilgrims.
Ooh. Yeah. There's not many, there's lots of windows, but I don't know if you can crack one open. I don't bit stuffy.
I think that is so cute. And those canons would be they'd be pretty independent, from any authority anyway. They wouldn't be exactly overburdened with the amount of work that the church required of them. So they would usually be the younger sons of noble families and living comfortable lives to a large extent, it seems. So the very nice little palaces that you see behind St. John's and Sint Servaaskerk were the canons' homes.
Okay.
Some of those are like miniature courts.
Yeah.
So, and they had to administer. Well, their prime responsibility was to look after the pilgrims and tend to them. And of course, there have been generations of good men who would actually do that. Who would see to it that there was a hospital where the pilgrims were tended to, and that people were fed and people were helped. Mm. Of course, all of that was going on as well. That's always the case.
And did the pilgrims stay in the church, or did they? Where did they sleep?
I suppose that sort of thing would have changed over time as well.
Yeah.
So there have been the old name for a hospital in Dutch is a gasthuis, a guest house. Mm. And so I suppose that there must have been a thin line between being ill or simply staying the night. And what they have always done too is provide some sort of basic education to mostly the boys of the city. There was also some of that going on.
Yeah.
Until later on, the orders like the Dominicans and the Jesuits would take over.
Right.
So all sorts of social and economic stuff going on as well from this increasingly large building and the surrounding villages that came under its authority. And of course, once the Servaas chapter became more and more established and powerful, it would get into conflict with the chapter at Our Sweet Ladies, because that also was a canon's church with a parish church next to it.
So did that have pilgrims coming as well?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. I hope they didn't split those ones between years. It's a 10-minute walk away.
Yes, exactly. I don't know, but it's it is of course undeniable that there was competition going on. Yeah. And some of it quite childish, and some of it just they'd find diplomatic solutions to stupid conflicts and just deal with it. It's funny. Yeah. People are people. That doesn't change over the centuries. Not at all. And then the French Revolution. Yes, of course. That's just I mean, everything was ended.
Yeah.
Everything was plundered. Everything of value was carted off to Paris for as far as the local people and the church people didn't manage to hide it.
So a lot of the things that were in the treasure room now, were they hidden, or okay?
Yeah, but it is a small fraction of what was there. The church was robbed of the vast majority of its treasure and the French Revolutionary armies just wanted the gold and the silver, and they destroyed these century-old treasures. So if you go to the treasure room now, I mean, you sort of it is overwhelming what is there in riches and in beauty, and then you have to imagine that 90% is gone.
Yeah.
So what that must have looked like to people 500, it wouldn't all have been there 500 years ago, but still. And then of course conquering armies. The times that the city was sacked, and that wasn't just raping the women and murdering people. It would also be ransacking the churches and dragging off whatever they found. So the bust of Saint Servatius that is now in the treasure room is a replacement donated to the church by a very shamefaced Spanish Catholic commander who was deeply embarrassed by the plunder that his soldiers got up to. They carted off the original.
Right. Well, that was nice of him.
Yeah, we didn't like him anyway. So, and then after the French Revolution, or the French administration, I should say, relented somewhat. Religious life, church life, had to start pretty much from scratch. I mean, lots of stuff had been sold. All the churches had been used for other purposes, to store cannon, or they served as stable, or whatever. And it also seems they sort of aimed at uses that would emphasize the sacrilege as well. Just put the cattle in there. And of course, you don't change people's minds and hearts in this way. So when the French administration started relenting just a little bit already early in the 19th century, there were small signs of revival of church life. And eventually, the 19th century saw a new blossoming, a rebirth of church life, parish life, Catholic traditions, as in the processions and all that. And that is also reflected in the buildings. But we'll talk about that in the next one.
So what was the Saint Servatius church used for during the French administration?
I'm not sure.
Because it's sort of a big, almost impractical space for other uses other than... I mean, you could probably fit a lot of people in there if you want a town hall or something.
They weren't. No, but I mean, you know by now how many large churches Maastricht has. Maastricht has. I mean, come on, there's an end to that.
Yeah.
It says here in of course the usual wonderful little booklet in the series Maastricht's Silhouette. The Sint Servaaskerk number 1. There's also a Sint Servaaskerk number 2. But it says here that during the years that after the church had been confiscated by the French revolutionaries, it was used as a store space. So whatever they needed space for.
Because I was just thinking, compared with things like the Nieuwenhof and which had living quarters and practical spaces where obviously eventually it was home to orphans and things. You could use it for sort of more practical, non-religious purposes. Big churches like that, difficult spaces to repurpose.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah, this is true, and they haven't been, and as soon as church life saw a chance to spring back, it did, and of course primarily in these places. Yeah. Because like I said, you don't change people's hearts and minds like that by sheer force.
And perhaps that helped. I don't know. Maybe it helped it spring back in that way, that it hadn't been reused for another practical purpose, whereas some of the buildings we've spoken about never went back to being religious buildings really again.
That might also have been connected to as you pointed out, that many of those were part of convents that had been abolished. So orders that had been made to disappear, and of course there have been great religious orders in enormous buildings, but they are all new foundations or new imports from the 19th century. So the big teaching orders in Maastricht, they only were founded in the 19th century, and they only started building their huge buildings in the 19th century. And then of course in the 20th century with increasing secularization, people leaving the church in droves, and a drastic decrease of the religious imprint on society. It is still these buildings that carry a significance for people, even if they no longer consider themselves Catholics.
Yeah, that's really interesting. With the revival of religious traditions and religion in Maastricht after the French administration, how did that affect Servaas? Did the canons come back? Was it very different?
No, it became much more a city church.
Okay.
So no, the canons did not come back. There were parish priests appointed to the parish of Servaas, and they tried to serve the people of the parish as best they could, and for quite some time that was difficult. Also because after all the messes of the French invading and annexing and then being defeated and being replaced by a new king from the north, Protestant. Everything in the city was divided in two, one half for the Protestants, one half for the Catholics.
Yes.
Which was ridiculous because, of course, 90% of the people were Catholic and 10% were Protestant, but still. That's how St. John's became a Protestant church. And for decades into the 19th century, it was forbidden to the Catholics to show their faith in public. So it was not allowed to have processions or outdoor mass or any manifestation of Catholic faith. Once that was over, this is when this Catholic Renaissance, when this resurgence took place, and a lot of church building campaigns started, but also, of course, looking at what was already there, restoration campaigns. So late in the 19th century, the architect Kuipers from Roermond started a very extensive exploration of the history of the church and restored it, and that was the first big restoration. And a century later, in the 1980s, the second big restoration took place, and that gave the church the look it has today. But we'll talk about that in the second podcast.
Yeah. Okay. And so from, I guess, that resurgence and then into the 20th century, where I personally probably feel like the city has become more and more secular. How has that changed Sint Servaas? Has that impacted Sint Servaas?
Yeah, I suppose, but it is still not like the other parish churches in the city, in that it will draw the faithful from all over.
Yeah.
So the churchgoers that are still there will, even if they don't go to their own parish church anymore, they will go to Servaas.
Yeah. And even, as I said, even people who aren't, well, they might be religious or not, they will come as a tourist destination as well, because it is a very impressive building filled with treasures and interesting history. So people will come and look. It is
a very lively spot in the city. It is not a quiet, disconnected time capsule. It is a living community.
Yeah.
It has not as many priests as it used to have, but they still serve the people. So they will say mass, and they will administer the sacraments. They will visit their parishioners. They will bring the sacrament of the sick and the dying to the people. And there is a large lay community that takes care of stuff, and that goes from ringing the bells, which is a job, I can assure you. It needs 8 grown, strong men to
Yeah.
move the big bell.
I've seen videos of bell ringers and they look like their arms are going to get yanked off sometimes.
No, it takes a certain skill. Yeah, it does. And there's loads of volunteers who will
Yeah.
help with all kinds of activities. There is a host of people cleaning the church and shining the brass and lighting the candles and so on and so forth. There is the present deacon of Servaas. Deacon means he is sort of the central priest in a deaconage.
Okay.
So he is the main priest in the city, and he is of the opinion that we shouldn't lose sight of the spiritual. Even if we can't be convinced to be faithful the way we were of old, that still we shouldn't scrap the church from our lives. So when the yearly fair takes place on the Vrijthof around Christmas,
Yes.
I mean the whole origin of these fairs, and you can hear that in the Dutch word kermis, that used to be, of course, kerkmis.
Yeah.
It was a festival connected to the church.
Well, I mean, even in English, it's Christmas. It's Christ. So.
Yeah. No, but as a name for a fair.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, where you go ice skating and eating hot greasy stuff and things like that. But it's we tend to see that as a purely secular thing.
Yes.
And of course it was always commercial and secular and all the rest of it, but connected to the church.
Yeah.
And that connection sort of was lost. And then the present deacon said, yeah, well, okay, we have all these ice skaters and people out on the Vrijthof Square. How about I open the church doors on the Vrijthof side and invite people in?
Yeah, I noticed that when we went last year, that especially at night, it would have sort of an arch all lit up and a pathway into the church. It was very...
Exactly.
We didn't end up going in, but... I think we were there too late. It was shut, but it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course they can't do it this year, which is sad. But I'm sure the present deacon will continue this tradition, and it's worth going, because the church will be all lit up and decorated, and there'll be a nativity scene, and they had in the long hallways adjoining the church, they had these hallways are jewels all by themselves, but they put in showcases with a few hundred miniature nativity scenes.
Oh wow.
And there was a game for children where they could roam all over the church and find clues and solve riddles and all of that. And what I saw, I was one of the volunteers there, and what I saw happen most of all, droves and droves of people, so many more than even the deacon hoped for, coming into the church and just gazing about them.
Yeah.
And then sitting down and becoming quiet, to just sit there. And
well, there's still something very almost sort of enigmatic or a bit, not scary, but a bit intimidating, I think, about churches, especially for people who haven't grown up going to churches or have grown up going to small parish churches, which are very more open and you just wander in, but it can be quite intimidating, especially with the big doors shut. So to go in and feel like you're allowed and you're being welcomed in, and then to be able to sit quietly in awe, I think is really special as a part of the community, because it is such a central structure in the city. It's which a lot of people, a lot of expats especially, might not have been in. I mean, if you're listening to this, you can tell us whether you have ventured into the Sint Servaas church or not.
And also, please do not wait for these Christmas carnival type things to take place. I mean, I think it is a terrible shame you have to pay admission to the church, but then politics in this country is not of a kind that funds its culture sufficiently.
Yes.
So they really have no choice. If you see their heating bills alone,
Yeah.
that is just atrocious. But of course, the main thing here is the church is always accessible as a church. So why not go to High Mass? Servaas, as Our Sweet Ladies, has a marvelous choir. And it has a magnificent organ. And during High Mass on a Sunday, the choir will sing, the organ will be played, and there'll be all this pageantry of a Catholic Mass.
Yeah.
And you'll know what's going on by the people around you. You just follow whatever they do. Normally there is also the moment when everybody shakes hands with everybody, wishing each other peace, which I think is a high point of Mass. Yes.
Probably not at the moment.
Not now. No, not now. But and also the church is not, and now you have to, because of Corona, you have to reserve a slot, so to speak, or a seat, so to speak, because there is a maximum of people who can go. But in normal times, the Mass is accessible, and the Mass is of a beautiful pageantry, full of significance. And even if you do not get the significance, you can feel conviction and the sanctity in it.
Yeah.
And if you live here, please, this is one of the deep roots of this city. This is how Maastricht came into being.
Yes. And I think churches are community spaces where people should feel welcome. And so if you are so inclined and curious, I think definitely go, and when it is safe to do so, or if you can book ahead, or go and have a look and indulge.
Yes, definitely, because this is the living culture also.
Yes.
This is what Maastricht does, or part of Maastricht, and the entire city goes back to the bridge and the grave. And I think it is nice to have a sense of what that means for us. Okay.
Is there anything that you wanted to add? Any little nuggets of?
I think this will do.
Okay. Well, I don't need to ask you what we're talking about next time, because we will be continuing our discussion of Sint Servaas, which I look forward to. I'm sure there'll be lots of tie-ins with everything, because obviously the people in the building are so heavily intertwined, but it would be really interesting to hear about the building. In the meantime, people, if you are in the city and can safely do so, you can always look at the outside of Sint Servaas. You've probably looked at it 100 times, but you can look at it with new eyes.
Yes.
With a mask on, maybe, and safely 1.5 meters away from everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the Meet Maastricht podcast. To keep up to date with all our content and events, make sure to follow us on social media. You can find us on Instagram at Meet Maastricht and on Facebook at Come Meet Maastricht. If you love our podcast and would like to see some amazing archival images as you listen, don't forget to subscribe to the Meet Maastricht YouTube channel. If you love what we do and would like to support the Meet Maastricht team, you can also donate through PayPal via our website meetmaastricht.eu. Meet Maastricht is definitely a labour of love, and all of the revenue we make through our tours and events currently goes towards administration costs. With your help, we would love to be able to give back a little something to the team so we can all keep bringing you our favourite stories and showing you our favourite places in Maastricht. Thanks again, and tune in next time to learn more about our beautiful city.
Tot ziens.